Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and we're back with another Sunday sew along for our jeans pattern, McCall's 5894. Today we're going to be doing some base fitting. So we're going to be basting the front and the back together and basting the waistband on, and then once we've decided if there's any fit adjustments we need to make, and I'll be showing you that on my actual body, doing some fit adjustment once we've made everything we need to do to the pattern, then we're going to actually be sewing the front and back together properly and attaching the waistband today. So today is a long one. Get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, and delve in. As always, I do have a virtual tip jar that helps support these sew-alongs and tutorials, supplies, equipment, all that kind of stuff. So if you would like to leave a little bit, there is a virtual tip jar. It's a coffee account, linked down below. As always, if you have any questions, please leave those down below and I will answer those as soon as possible. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend and I will see you next time. Bye. Okay guys, today we're going to do some baste fitting, get our front and back sewn together and get the waistband on. And then next week we'll be putting in our hardware, so our jeans buttons and our rivets. And then we'll be putting on our belt carriers, belt loops, and then hemming. So we're almost to the end. You've almost made a pair of jeans. All right, we're gonna go ahead and do our waistband really quick because when we do our base fitting, it's important to have the waistband at least basted on to help keep everything from stretching out, basically. So we're gonna go ahead. I think I had mentioned I do not interface my waistband, except we will interface where I'm going to end up putting the buttonhole and the button. So there will be some at each end on either side, but I actually do that a little bit later just in case we need to adjust with the waistband. But I don't use any kind of interfacing inside the waistband. I just find it more comfortable. But what I do is use twill tape in the top, which of course is not near me. And I've got this cotton twill tape, from Wawac, and it's linked down below. It's 1/4 inch. Again, this was much larger roll way back when. I use this stuff quite often. So, yeah, I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. So this is piece 10. Now, the original pattern has this one rectangle that you basically fold in half. I have turned it into a contoured waistband, so I cut it in half. So instead of just having one waistband piece, we have two. So you can go back and watch how I've done that. But I am going to, so this would be different. If you just have one, you'll just be folding it over. You can't really, I guess you could put the twill tape in. Anyway, this is a much easier way to do it. So I'm going to put my pieces right sides together. And because I, again, have turned this into a contoured waistband, the part that is the smaller curve is the part that goes against my body, and that is the one that we are sewing. And in my there's only one notch that I have on this top curve, and that's right at center back, just to help me line up my top and bottom. All of my other notches are on the bottom that get attached to the bottom part of the pants. So what I'm going to do is move this pattern piece out of the way, is I'm going to sew, again, this is the top of the waistband. So this is the part that's going to go up against my body, not the part that gets sewn to the pants. And I'm going to sew at 5/8 inch because that is my seam allowance for this part. I know that because that's the seam allowance I added. All right. So I'm really quickly just going to sew these two together at 5/8 inch seam allowance. All right. Now, we have to pick which side is going to be our facing, so the side that's going to be against our body, and which side is going to be the side that is faces out to the world. And if you look at your pattern, me adjust here. All right, if you look at your pattern, you'll see that you've got marks for where center front is for your size. So here is center front here on this end, and then center front here on this end is closer to the end, if that makes sense. So if you were to fold these end to end here, well, here, let me do it the other way so you can actually see the writing. If we were to fold these to where our ends are flush, you will see that my center front is here on this side, but it is way up here on this side. So obviously there's a longer piece past center front on one side. That is the side that is going to go on the right side of your body, because this gets sewn to the fly extension that is also, you know, underneath that fly. I hope that makes sense. So the piece that has more fabric past center front is the side that goes on the right side of your body when worn. So I need to determine, oops, my machine is holding my waistband hostage. All right, so I have marked center front. There is center front on this side. And then there is center front on this side. And then I also have a notch here, but that matches up with my pants. So obviously this is the side that has a lot more than this side. So this needs to go against the right side of my body. So if we flip this right sides together and think that this needs to go on the right side of my body, so it'll go against my body like this. So this will be against my body. This will be on the outside for the right. I hope this is making sense. Then I know that this side is my facing. So this is the side, I call it my facing. It's just the side that's going to be against my body. Okay, and the reason we need to know that is because we want to sew, we're basically going to understitch our twill tape to the seam allowance. So we want to make sure our seam allowance is going towards the piece that's going to be against our body. So basically, because there's going to be a little line of stitching on that, and we don't want that to be seen from the right side. Now, you could totally go ahead and press this if you wanted to. I'm going to press it at the end. So what I'm going to do is unroll. Normally I have this in my lap, but I have a tripod in my lap, so we'll make do. So what I do is I line up my twill tape here. Actually, and I don't really want it in the seam allowance. And it could be that we end up, I mean, we may have to chop some of this off anyway if things end up too long, not long enough. A lot of times there's some leeway in there. But I'm going to line up the left edge of my twill tape to that seam line with the twill tape laying on top of the seam allowance. And I'm basically going to hit the wrong thing. Okay. I'm basically going to understitch the twill tape and the seam allowance both at the same time. And my goal is that I'm going to line up, just go slow, and I'm going to line up my twill tape with that seam line, and I'm trying to sew kind of in the middle of the twill tape, just for ease. Because this isn't really technical. I mean, it is understitching, but we're going to be top stitching the waistband at the very end, so this is really more for stability. All right, off we go. All right. So there we have it. We've basically understitched our waistband. So now when we go and press, this will be the right side of our waistband, and that will be the wrong side, because you will be able to see a line of stitching through that. So that'll be against our body though, so that should be okay. So I am going to go to the ironing board, and I am just going to press these, press this, you know, nice and neat. It'll just make it easier. And then we'll have it all prepped and ready to go when we attach it to our waistband. So I'm going to go do that, and then we are going to baste our fronts and backs together. Woohoo! All right, so we have our fronts and our backs all completed, and we are going to baste these babies together. So the instructions on, let's see, number 31, have you actually just pinning to baste it. I just think it's just as easy to do the machine. Obviously, you want to go with a long stitch length. I'm putting mine at a 5mm for this. And they're having you do it wrong sides together so that your seam allowances are on the outside, probably just to make it easier to adjust and make adjustments. You know, you can adjust your pins and that kind of thing, which I can totally see. So that is definitely one way you can do it, by just pinning them together at the seam allowance. I'm just going to baste mine. I'm fairly confident that these are going to be good. So I'm just going to baste them. And actually, I'm going to have to take all of my basting out anyway, because I'm going to flat fell my inseam, and I will need, in order to do that, I can't have my outseams sewn together, and my inseams also get sewn wrong sides together, and then to do the flat fell. So, but I'm going to baste them all right sides together. So we're literally, all this is going to have to come out. So I'm just going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to do the inseam first. So I will just match up my center front and center back. If these don't match perfectly, that's okay. No one's going to be that close, or they shouldn't be up that close to see if your top stitching lines match. They are way too close if they can see that. Also, I want to note this pattern has 1-inch seam allowances in your inseam and on the side seam, just for ease of fitting. So you want to make sure you use the correct seam allowances, obviously, and that is something that's a little different. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet or not. Okay, that's the only pins I'm going to put in. So I'm actually going to turn off my backstitch function. It'll just make it easier to tear everything out at the end. And we are going to baste. Okay, once you've done your inseams, I got a little pinch there. I'm not going to worry about that. It has to come out anyway. This is just for fitting. Now you're going to do each out seam, so your side seams basically. Again, those have a 1-inch seam allowance, so keep that in mind. All right, I'm just going to go do the other side seam, and then I will meet you back. We still need to put the waistband on. Yes. Let me do the other side seam, and then we'll come back and put the waistband on, baste it on real quick. All right, so here are my pants, obviously wrong sides out. I've unzipped my fly. I've got my waistband. Now, again, this is the right side when worn on this side. And I had determined that was this. And actually, I've marked my center front notch there. So see, I actually have a lot of excess here. And I think I remember that on it just gives you a lot to play around with if you need it, if you need to let any of the side seams out, since there's such a healthy thing of the side seams. So basically what you can do, if you want, you can just keep these two sides together and baste them on together. That's fine. That's probably what I'm going to do just for ease, because it all has to come out anyway. So what I like to do is start with center back, which I've got to find. I think that's center back, which I have marked. Yes, it is. And I'm just gonna pin it in place there at center back. And then I'm just going to pop this in, matching my notches. You know what, guys? I think I did that wrong. I switched that. The longer, is that right? Oh, geez. Hold on. I think I did that wrong. Okay, for the record, I think that your longer side needs to be on the left when worn because it's off-centered more. I don't think it's going to matter much because they've given you so much excess on either side in case you need to let out those side seams. But I do think I did that wrong. So we're just gonna, yeah, I think that would be really tight. Well, maybe not. I mean, I don't want to gather my waist in at all. Just gonna give myself a little bit more room. There is excess on this waistband though. I can attest to that, so that's good. It should make fitting really easy. I'm also way out of frame, I apologize. All right, so now I'm just gonna go and I'm just top stitching this waistband in place around the top, all the way around. Yeah, because this will all have to come back out. So I will do that and then I'll meet you back with these on and we can talk about any extra fitting I think I need to do. All right, so they're basted to fit. Obviously, I also want to point out when you baste these, the zipper is going to be wonky. It's going to be in the way. It may pull funny here. Don't worry about that. That's just because you haven't cut off the top of your zipper yet, which we're not there yet, so don't do that. But you can still tell if it's going to be too tight, too loose, whatever. I am so pleased with the way that my waistband fits now. It's just really hugging that part of my back. I'm very happy with where I put my pockets. I think they're just right, not too low, not too high. I mean, obviously these are super long on me, which I left, remember I left extra length. I just wanted them to be long. So I will go back and hem, when I do the hem at the very end, that's when I'll adjust the length. I think I only left probably about an extra inch when all is said and done. Once I have a shoe on and then obviously an inch for the hem. Anyway, I am very pleased with how they're fitting in the rear end. They're coming up snugly against my waist, so I think that will be good. Yeah, they're a straight leg pant. Sorry, I'm gonna look in the, so I'm liking what I've done with the crotch. I think that looks good. I'm inhaling denim dust. Yeah, I mean, it's a straight leg jean, and I think, again, you know, if I were to not have the pooling around my legs, or around my feet, I think that's going to be, I mean, a fun leg. I'm not sure yet if I want to wear these with heels, how I'm going to hem them. If I'm going to hem them with heels, or something with a little bit of a heel, or hem them with a flat. I might go with something with a little bit of a heel. Not a lot, but just a little bit. Wear my boots and stuff with them. Make them a little bit more of my boot cut type jean. So yeah. Now, I also, you're going to have a lot of bulk there on the side seams because there's 1 inch seam allowances in there, which is a lot, you know, for fitting purposes. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how these have turned out. And I'm looking to make sure that I'm not missing anything on me. But yeah, I think that's going to be, it's hard to look at your rear end without distorting and turning. So I will stand there. I'll stand where you guys can see without distorting it. I also don't have my pants fastened in the front yet. So yeah, I think that that is going to be pretty good. All right, next step. Make any tweaks you want to make. If you want to let anything out, if you want to take anything in, both you can do that both in the inseam and on the outseam. But once you've made those changes to your front and backs, go ahead and unpick the waistband and then unpick your side seams and your inseam. And I will meet you back at the sewing machine so that we can sew them together for real. Alrighty. All right. Once you have everything unpicked, it's time to actually sew it back together. Also, I noticed there's actually a 1-inch seam allowance at the top of the pant where it connects with the waistband. And the bottom part of the waistband where it connects to the pant is the seam allowance I did not mess with because I cut it in half, obviously, from the top part. Anyway. So I had only sewn that in at a 5/8 inch seam allowance for that basting fit, but I will sew it in at the full 1 inch when we put the waistband on. So that will shrink everything by 3/8 of an inch. So, well, 3/4 of an inch when all is said and done from each side. So it'll make the waistband 3/8 of an inch smaller visually, and it'll make the top of the pants 3/8 of an inch smaller visually, if that makes sense. All right. I mean, that doesn't really affect fit at all for me. So anyway. Okay. We are going to sew our pants together. And we're going to do the inseam first. So there's two ways you could go about this. You could definitely, just the way we basted them, you could sew them right sides together, finish that seam allowance, press it to the back, top stitch it, call it good. That would be a faux flat fell seam, and that's how we've done the other seams on these. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to do an actual flat fell seam, I'm going to show you how to do that. So what you're going to do is, it's kind of like doing a French seam, actually. I mean, you start the same way. It's not really anything like a French seam when all is said and done. But you start with wrong sides together. Sorry, off camera here for just a second, trying to get a lot of fabric here. All right, so we are wrong sides together. And I am just going to pin my seam allowances, or my, I'm going to match my center front and center back seams. Now, I'm not going to, again, I mean, I want them to be obviously as lined up as possible, but no one's going to be that close to see how, if your top stitching is matching up at that join. All right, so what I'm going to do, I put my machine back on 2.5 millimeter stitch length. I've turned my back stitch function back on, and now we are going to sew the inseam. Again, we are sewing this at 1 inch, and we are sewing wrong sides together. And you want to match your notches as you go. Your back, I always get confused. If it's the back side, your back side, the back part of your leg is going to be, when you get close to the crotch, is actually shorter. Is that right? You have to stretch it a little bit. No, it's longer. So you have to stretch the front to meet the back. So yeah, just match your notches. Everything should, but you may have to stretch from the notch to the crotch. I hate that word. Have I said that already? I hate that word. Okay, let's sew. All right. Woo. Okay. Once you have cut this or sewn this, we're gonna inhale a lot of denim dust, and then we're going to do some trimming. Okay, so when all is said and done, this is the front right here to my left. When all is said and done, we're going to trim this. Everything is going to get pressed towards the back. Everything's going to get pressed towards the back, and this is going to get folded over the other seam allowance. So we want this to be shorter. We're going to cut the back seam allowance less than half, because then this is going to get wrapped around that and then top stitch down for the flat fell. So now, hope that makes sense. If you split things apart, and things can get a little unwieldy at this moment because you just have a lot of fabric and all right, so the front of my jeans is right here, and this is the back of my jeans. And actually, this is a perfect time to use duckbill applique scissors if you've got them. So we're basically grading the seam allowance. So I am just going to go through here, and I am going to cut this, gosh, I only want to leave like maybe 3/8, quarter of an inch of a seam allowance on the back side. And the reason these are great is that rounded edge isn't going to get caught on any of that fabric and accidentally snag something or catch something, so then you cut it, something you're not wanting to cut. Okay, so this is kind of hard to do with the camera in my lap. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this all the way to the other hem, where I'm trimming the back seam allowance to about a quarter of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, somewhere around there. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you'll see that it'll look good no matter how much you've trimmed this one. You just want to trim it enough. So we're going to do that, and then I'm going to meet you at the ironing board, because that's going to be our next step. Okay, so as you can see, I've trimmed that seam allowance to like, quarter of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. So what we're going to do next is I basically have everything pulled apart. I'm going to press my seam allowance open first. So I'm first going to go and hitting with a lot of steam. And I'm pressing this open just to get a really good crease. Okay, once I've pressed everything open, now I'm going to press everything to the back. So I'm going to press it all to where that bigger seam allowance is going to cover the smaller one. Okay, when I get here to the inseam, or the part where the center front and center back meet here, I'm going to hit it with quite a bit of steam, and then this needs a lot of whacking here. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to go switch to top stitching thread, and we're basically tucking and top stitching. Now, before we do that, typically I'm working with seam allowances in the inseam there that are 5/8 of an inch, which obviously is going to make a little in between a quarter of an inch and 3/8 of an inch of a fold. I have a 1 inch seam allowance that I'm folding here, so that's a 1/2 of an inch, which is, bigger. I don't know that it bothers me enough to trim it because I really want this to be as close to, I want this seam allowance that I'm folding to be as even as possible so that it creates as even of a top stitching ridge as possible. But you could definitely, if you wanted to, trim off, you know, 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, whatever, off of that top seam allowance, if that's important to you. So that's, you know, something that you could do if you so desire. I'm just going to leave as is. So let's go to the other top stitching machine and let's top stitch this inseam. All right. Now, sorry, let me get my leg in here. I'm assuming, I mean, you can definitely, if you want, you could press this. You know, I'm wrapping this basically around itself, and you want to make sure that that back seam allowance is all tucked in nice and neat. You could definitely go and press. I just kind of like finger pressing it as I go. I find I get a nice little, very pleasing inseam. Sorry, I've got to kind of go around the camera. Whew. Okay, now this folded edge. Oh my gosh. Guys, that was my boob that keeps hitting the tripod and moving the camera. I apologize. Okay. I lost my train of thought. All right, so I folded this and I'm going to be sewing about 1/8 of an inch away from the fold. I'm not going to back stitch, just do a straight stitch. So let's get going. And I go for a few inches and then I'll stop and tuck some more. I'm also kind of pulling the 2 layers apart. And I'm also using my finger to tuck any stray because it's starting to fray. My edges of the denim are starting to fray at this point, which is typical now that we've worked with the denim so much. And so I kind of tuck those under as I go. Okay, when you get up to this area, there's just a ton of bulk. Get it all nice and tucked in and just go slow. I would also like to remind you that if this gets wonky and does not look good, that's okay. No one should be that close to this area of your body anyway. At least not looking at your top stitching thread. Okay, and then you're left. Oh my gosh. Hopefully that just moved. I wasn't looking at the screen. I was watching my top stitching. Hopefully that wasn't wonky the whole time. Got my boob hit it again. Okay, so then you end up with this very nice line of top stitching on the front, and then on the back, it's all nice and neat and enclosed as well. It's just a really beautiful seam. Now you can't easily do that on the, you can't do that on the outside legs. You have to just do it regularly. At least I don't think you could. Maybe there's some way you could. Oh, that'd be really tough. You may have to have a special machine. Anyway, I mean, they had to have done it at some point before sergers were invented. Excuse me, that was disgusting. I need to burp. Okay. Anyway, there. That is a flat fell seam. So if you were choosing to do that, you can you do it that way. All right, let's go back to the normal machine. So back to your regular thread. We're going to sew our side seams, so the outer seams, and then serge and press, and then we do have to come back for the top stitching again. So you're going to get really good at changing your thread, but I'll meet you back at the other machine. Okay, let's sew our outer seams. We are still working with 1-inch seam allowances. And for this one, we are going right sides together. So remember, we're still dealing with that 1-inch seam allowance. We will trim these though. All right. I'm at a 2.5 stitch length again. So if you are on the same machine and having to go back and forth between top stitch and regular, don't forget to change your stitch length as well. Okay, so I'm gonna now go and oops, unpick this and fix this, and then I'm going to serge my seam allowance and press it towards the back, and I'm going to do this to this other side as well. So I'm gonna again trim this until it leaves about 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'll be trimming off about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to serge, pressing it towards the back on both sides, and then I'll meet you back at the other machine. So put your top stitching thread back in when you're finished with this. Okay. All right. So once we have finished our seam allowances, and got a stray thread there, finish our seam allowances off, press them to the back, which I've done here. I'm going to show you where we're going with this. We are going to top stitch basically the pocket piece. Oh, I need to trim both those, don't I? So we are going to top stitch kind of in the circle, but we are only top stitching down to where the pocket stops. And then we are going to finish it off with kind of a bar tack. And I will talk about the stitch length there when we get to that point. Okay. So I've already done that side. So now we're going to do it. I'm actually going to do it on camera on this side. So again, I have trimmed my seam allowances, finished them off with a serger, and pressed them to the back. There's my pocket there. So now, sorry, that's okay. Get our machine. So I've got it set on 3.5 stitch length, straight stitch at the moment. And I'm going to sew, here's the front of my pants, here's the back of my pants. So we're sewing on the backhand side because remember we pressed that seam allowance to the back. So I am going to, again, about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. We're going to start our straight stitch. When you get to like the yoke where there's some bulk, just go slow. You can also hit that with your mallet really well if that helps. I'm just feeling under here to where the end of my pocket is. Okay, so I'm to the end of my pocket. So with my needle down, I'm going to switch to a zigzag stitch, and I am going to take that to a 1 width, or I'm sorry, a 1 point, no, I think I did 1 and 1. A 1 width and a 1 length. Okay, so a 1 and a 1. And go down about, I don't know, 1/2 of an inch, and now I'm going to go back. So I went down and back. So that just really keeps the pocket where it's supposed to be. Okay, so now we have done that. All right, folks, it is time to put on our waistband. So now we have to switch back to regular thread, and I will meet you over at the other sewing machine. All right, so now we have our jeans, and I've got them inside out right now, and then we have our waistband piece. So the way I like to do my jeans is I like to sew the the waistband on against the wrong side of the pants first. So that way, when we top stitch the waistband in place, that's when we're flipping our seam allowances and stuff up and over. I just find it easier to get a more precise top stitching line, especially when you're using a contrasting thread like this. You want it to be pretty perfect. So I almost always with my jeans put it on the wrong side first. So remember, we have on our waistband, we do have a right and a wrong side. This is my wrong side because it's got, you can see the stitching line where I've stitched my twill tape down, basically understitched it. So this is what we're going to be sewing, basically the right side of the fabric, but the wrong side of the waistband, if that makes sense. So think about the way that it's going to go on, basically. It'll be going on like this because we want this against the inside of our body. So we are going to pull the top layer, so this is the right side of my waistband, away, and we're going to be pinning the right side of the waist. And I've got notches here somewhere. So I guess I should say we're going to pin the right side of the waistband facing. There, that's a little less confusing, right? The right side of the waistband facing to the wrong side of the pants. And I'm actually going to match it at center back here. And again, if you've made any adjustments, you may just have a ton of extra fabric hanging off the end. And that's kind of how these waistbands were made. So I'm just, you know what? I'm not even going to mess around really with my center front matching. Because, I mean, I just feel like there's a lot of wiggle room, which is fine. That's great. I mean, you'd rather have too much than not enough. I just stabbed myself in the hand. So I'm just going to add some pins in here just to anchor it. Now, here, you want to make sure that everything is lying flat and tucked in. I had a pair of white jeans where I did not really make sure that that was the case. And the fly, I couldn't, it took me the longest time. It was one of my first pair of jeans. The longest time why things weren't lying flat in the front, which if there's any place where you want your pants to lie flat, it's center front, you know, right there along that zipper. And again, I still have a really long zipper. That's fine. My zipper is undone, so that makes it so much easier. We are going to trim our zipper here soon. And I'm also going to warn you, and when I'm sewing this on, we'll talk, I'll remind you, but be very, very careful with a needle around the metal teeth. That will not only break your needle in record time, it will also send shrapnel flying. You know, I wear glasses normally, so a little eye protection just in case, but we're going to use the hand wheel anytime you're anywhere close around those metal teeth, because I mean, I have on many occasions not paid attention and then ended up, it's like an alarming like breakage of the, of the needle. Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to sew with the waistband against the feed dogs. Just going to move you guys. All right. So I am sewing. Now remember, there's actually a 1-inch seam allowance here that I was not aware of, which I feel like, well, I guess that might be right. I guess that looks okay. All right, so I am sewing again. We've got the right side of the jeans up. This is the waistband facing. You can see my line of stitching just barely on that facing when I did the understitching. So now I'm using a, line that up, a 2.5 stitch length, and we're gonna sew the waistband down. Okay, now right off the bat, I can feel there's my teeth. So we're just going to crank our hand wheel. And if you feel some resistance, just kind of like right there, okay, it will like slide around the teeth if you use the hand wheel. All right, now I'm past it, so now we can continue on. Now it's much easier to see the teeth on this side, so you're less likely to forget than on the other side. Oh, look at that. I love when it just goes right in between those teeth. Okay, so now that we have done that, I'm going to pull out the instructions. Let me pull out the instructions and we'll talk about where we're at with the instructions. Okay, so if you're following on the instructions, this is 43 through 47. It's weird, I don't see anything in the instructions about it being a 1-inch seam allowance, but I do on the pattern, so that's what we're gonna use. And I guess when you fold that up, I guess that looks fine. So that's what we're gonna go with. All right, so we're gonna trim this seam allowance though. I mean, make sure, I need to pull out my pins. Make sure you don't have any pinched edges or anything, but obviously with a 1-inch seam allowance, you're gonna have to really trim this down. All right, so first we're gonna tackle our zipper here. Let me just, jeans are falling off the table here. It makes it difficult. So first things first, these are not, well, they were fabric scissors a long, long time ago, once upon a time. Now these are my zipper cutting scissors. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm just gonna cut this off like in between the teeth at the top. Now make sure that your zipper pull is down in the pants at this point. You don't want to accidentally cut that. All right, so I've now cut that off. Now what I'm gonna do, I can see my stitch line, which is right here. I'm actually gonna cut like, I don't know, into the zipper tape, like right, well, here. I'm basically cutting the teeth away from the zipper tape. But I don't want to go below that stitching line. I want to get as close to it as I can. And I'm leaving the tape in there. I'm just cutting off the teeth. Come in. There we go. Which just kind of takes some bulk out. So my stitching line is actually in between this tooth and this tooth. So, but I'm still attached there in the seam allowance there with the zipper tape. So that's what I'm going to do on that side and then also on the other side. So first, show you again, I'm gonna cut it off flush with the top. And just throw all this away. And these are my zipper scissors. Everyone has zipper scissors, don't they? All right, and then on this one, we have to kind of peel this away. So I can really see where I want to cut. So I'm just going to kind of cut right above. It can be kind of hard, especially because I've got this like top stitch down. Come at it from the top. There we go. All right, so I still have a tooth that's there in the seam allowance, just one though. So I don't have to worry about anything flying off or any of that stuff. Okay, so I can put those aside now. So now what I want to do, and I can do this safely with my fabric scissors because now we just have zipper tape that's up where we're going to trim, is I want to trim my seam allowance. And I'm going to go in hard. I'm going to leave about 3/8 of an inch, and I'm actually, we have a lot, this is going to get cut off. So it'll be flush with this. Obviously we need somewhat of a seam allowance and we'll do that in a little bit, but I'm just going to start here. And the idea is to leave about 3/8 of an inch. All right, once that's been trimmed, obviously, we'll go up to the, to our pressing area and press this seam up into the waistband. But before we do that, let's go ahead and finish off our, okay, well, I would typically love to do a burrito finish on this. The denim can just get really finicky. And we also have the added thing that we just have a lot of seam allowance here. So what we're going to do, so we've already sewn this obviously to the wrong side. So you can go ahead and press this up now. I'm going to wait and just do it all in 1 second. But what we're going to do is we're going to fold this over right where it naturally wants to fold. And on this side, we want this seam allowance up here against the facing side, because remember, that's been top stitched or understitched. And then we're going to fold. Obviously, you could go ahead and press this if you want. I'm literally just finger pressing this though and folding it because I want that to be uniform. So I'm really just, and I've got there's going to be some leeway with turn of cloth, so you won't have like quite an inch seam allowance back here. But I basically want that just to line up as much as possible. Okay. And then once that has, you can definitely pin it, but I'm just going to sew straight down so that I am flush with my fly here. Oh, and sometimes if you don't start on your fabric, your machine unthreads. Hold on. Okay. Just straight down. And then you can definitely turn it if you really want to get right up to that fold. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I got that whole thing. All right, so there is the end of our waistband. Obviously, we have a ton of excess here. So we're going to go trim and then trim that off. Be careful trimming too much here because sometimes when things get tucked under, it can get a little crazy. So then when we flip things right side out, and then all of this is going to get tucked under. But we have so much seam allowance here that we'll trim a little bit here in just a second. Now you can play around. If you feel like there's too much bulk, you can definitely trim out a little bit, but we do want that to lie nicely against there when we do our top stitching. So other than those little stray those little areas out. So yeah, you can definitely play with this. So we'll do this over at the ironing board a little bit more. Then I'm just going to do the same thing to the other side. Again, we want the seam allowance and here to be against the facing side. All right, so you have got that how you want it. It's the same thing. We're going to just follow that line. Trim off the excess. And again, depending on what adjustments you had to make to the pattern will determine if you even have any excess. You may not even have any excess. Okay. So then the same thing on this side. That's all going to get tucked under. And we'll play around. That's kind of bulky in there. Lose a little bit more of that. Okay. So now we're going to go to the ironing board. So flip all this right outside now. And I'm actually going to go and I'm going to trim about 3/8 of an inch off of the bottom of the this right side, just all the way across real quick. It doesn't have to be precise, and you'll see why when we go to the ironing board for the pressing. But yeah, before I do anything, I'm just going to trim off starting at this point and then just kind of trim 3/8 of an inch all the way around. But I'll meet you back at the pressing board and then we will get this all in order. All right, so now we are ready to use our iron. So I've trimmed this raw edge about 3/8 of an inch. It doesn't have to be precise, and you'll see why in just a second. And you don't want to do too much, obviously. But I'm just going to use a knitting needle just to get that corner out as much as possible on both sides. Can be a little rougher with the denim. Okay. So first, I like to use a ham on this just because this part up here is curved. It just makes it easier. I don't know. I feel like I can just get a crisper press. So first things I'm going to do is I'm going to actually press this seam allowance up into that waistband. I haven't done that yet. If you've already done that, obviously, then... Okay, now that we've done that, I'm just going to go and since the top part of our waistband has already been finished nice and neat, and since we understitched it, it wants to lie nice and flat, I'm just going to go around, kind of tuck that under, and I'm basically folding under my waistband and matching it to the seam line that I have underneath that. Now, you can be just a little below it. So just kind of, I mean, it kind of lays the way that it wants to lay. And then I'm going to go through with glass-headed pins, because we're going to press before we sew, and that way we don't melt anything. And again, I like to do this over a ham because I can just get it a little flatter. And you can press as you go. And we can also, before we sew anything, we can hit this these ends here with our mallet. Okay, so I have this all pinned and pressed. So now, if you want, just again, for ease of sewing, you want to be careful not to hit your pins, but just whack those ends. All right, make those nice and flat. Okay, so now we are ready to top stitch our waistband in place. And that's going to be our last step for today. So go ahead and put your top stitching thread back in your machine. Again, sorry about that. And I'll meet you there. All right, now we're going to top stitch our waistband in place, and everything is going to be so nice. All right, so instead of starting on a far end, I like to start in a little bit. I just think it's easier. You don't get quite as much of the thread issue. So once again, I'm going to be sewing about 1/8 of an inch away. And I'm going to sew the bottom part down first, since that's the part that's still loosey-goosey. And we're just gonna go 3.5 millimeter stitch length. Now, I want to remind you, now I started past the zipper here, so that's not been an issue yet, but it will be an issue in a minute. So don't forget about that zipper. Okay, so we can see that I'm coming upon that zipper here. Again, it's much easier to see on this side than it is on the other. So I'm going to sew really close up to it. And then I'm going to do the hand wheel till I'm past. I'm going to sew up. Now this part can get tricky because you have to have the bulk of the jeans on the other side of the machine because you're going back the other way now. So just make sure you're only sewing on what you mean to sew on, and just go slow. To have my scissors tied around my neck. Okay, and again, we're coming up on that zipper. So you can kind of feel where that is. Do the hand wheel. And then I backstitch. Alrighty. And now you have a waistband sewn into place, which is all very exciting. Okay, so I will, that's it for this week. Next week, we are going to hem, put in our buttonhole and all of our hardware, and also our belt loops, our belt carriers. So I will see you back here for that. Bye-bye.